Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and a very good evening. Thanks for joining this Temasek Foundation and WAN-IFRA journalism program on the next big health story. I'm Fergus Bell, and founder and CEO of Fathom, a news lab and consultancy based in the UK. And I've been lucky enough to be the lead facilitator of the in-person part of this program that started back in 2022. It's a pleasure to now convene the second virtual session for this second webinar. The COVID-19 pandemic brought about an unprecedented shift in the way that we approach healthcare, with an increased interest in new solutions and a readiness to move beyond traditional and resource constraints. The digital healthcare industry is rapidly evolving. As a journalist, staying current on these trends is crucial. I'm therefore delighted to be joined by two experts in the field today, and I'll introduce them in a moment. First, a few housekeeping rules to highlight. We encourage you to make this an interactive session. So please do feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring that and we'll be able to put the questions directly to the speakers. If you don't know where that is, just look at the bottom of your Zoom screen and it says Q&A. So let's get started on the introductions. Artur Olesch is the digital editor and journalist and storyteller. He's also the founder and editor and chief of aboutdigitalhealth.com and is based in Germany. Shen Lim is a key opinion leader in the field of healthcare informatics. He's VP of Operations and Product at EVYD Technology in Brunei. Each of our esteemed speakers is going to start with a presentation on their work, delving into the digital health trends shaping our future and exploring how technology and data are changing every aspect of healthcare, of the healthcare system. I'm hoping that journalists will begin to see how they might apply some of these learnings in their reporting and reporting preparedness ahead of the next health crisis, whatever it may be. Artur, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fergus. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. For me, it's a good morning. It's a very snowy morning here in Berlin. I hope you have something to drink, a coffee or a tea. And well, it's a challenge for me to explain you or to show you what would be the next big story when it comes to healthcare in the time of the pandemics 2.0. Of course, we've seen during the last 2-3 years of the COVID-19 pandemic how the technologies were developing very quickly. We've seen, for example, also the technologies that had some troubles before the 2020 to explode or to develop, like, for example, telemedicine, that suddenly they were accepted in almost all of the societies around the world. So it's like, you know, progress in time, about 10 years progress within a 2 or 1 year. So it is amazing how fast the technologies, some technologies have progressed. So I've prepared for you a short review of the trends, or I would say tendencies, that we are observing right now on the market, on the healthcare market. Of course, there are many more, but I would like to focus on those that have been accelerated during the COVID-19 pandemic. You see already the slide, and you also will get a slide I will send you on chat, so you can see it afterwards. So the first one is, of course, telemedicine. Telemedicine is something that helped a lot to provide healthcare services during lockdowns, when we were locked at homes, when we couldn't meet the doctor. So it's a technology that before 2020 had a lot of trouble with one-to-one using videos, using the telephone, and it's even more telemedicine was really a helpful tool, a practical tool that we almost all of us used to the pandemic to stay with us, because we've seen, of course, that we are going back to the doctor offices, but nonetheless, the deployment of telemedicine will stay and is staying quite high when we see how it was before the pandemic. Laboratory at home is the second trend, the second tendency that we've seen, because again, already everyone used the COVID test, the home test. So it was very easy to test if you are infected with SARS-CoV-2 or not. You just bought a test in the pharmacy, and you didn't have to go to the doctor or to the laboratory to test yourself. And this is only the first phase of this big trend from my perspective, because there are many more home tests. Like, for example, this year in the beginning, WeThings, a French company, has presented the urine test that can be made at home without going to the laboratory. And we've seen that this kind of tests are coming to the market more and more, and this is like a tsunami that we'll observe in the next few years. Health checkups with our doctors, this is something also new. We have a lot of chatbots. We have a lot of symptom checkers already on the market. The biggest one are trying to replace Dr. Google, so asking the symptoms on Google, but in a more science-based way. So I mean that it's not like this kind of giving on Google and expecting that you will get maybe a diagnosis or not, or maybe a false diagnosis, probably a false one, but evidence-based symptom checker. So the symptom checker is asking you what's going on with you, and then you will give answers, and basing on your answer, you will get maybe some kind of probability of what would be the reason of the symptom. New healthcare delivery models. We have seen new healthcare providers, not only the traditional ones on the market that have been already on the market for a long time, but also digital ones that are offering, for example, digital insurance, offering digital health 24/7, and so on. Health-related fake news. This is something also that is kind of problematic and will be still problematic in the next years. I mean, all the fake news that are coming on social media, all the fake news groups that are rising on social media. And this is also a threat to patients' health. It's not only a kind of trend, but if somebody is viewing a social media and somebody is following this fake news, it could be a threat for his or her health. Prescription apps, we've seen this trend in the United States, also in Germany, here in Europe, in Belgium, and the United Kingdom. The apps, healthcare apps, can be prescribed by a doctor, and then they are financed by the public payer. this is also a new approach to healthcare. It's not only a medicine, a pill, but also an app can be treated as a treatment. Yeah. Then the medical virtual reality. It's a very big area, so maybe I won't go inside. Virtual reality can be used for pain treatment, for example, and there are already therapies developed in the United States and also in China. So I think this is a trend that we also should observe. Patient-generated data, all the data that are coming from all the wearables or the smartwatches. Before, still 5-10 years ago, the data about the patient was the data collected in the electronic health record. The new trend is the data is also coming from our homes, from our wearables. So we have a 360 view about what is going on in a patient's life. Do-it-yourself help. Of course, instead of going to the gym, we go to the virtual courses. We are doing fitness at home. This is something that we also observed during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we were afraid to go to the fitness or gym was closed. Remote health monitoring, very strong trend for COVID-19 patients with a stable health situation. They could also stay at home. They didn't have to go to the hospital. They were treated at home, but at the same time monitored 24/7 using all the great technologies and wearables. A clinical decision support system, AI-based systems that also can diagnose patients very quickly, like we again seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, the patients with COVID-19 or patients with some lung problems. AI system could diagnose very quickly using the medical images of the patient. And coaching and AI support. This is a new area to be observed in the next years and is connected with technologies like, for example, ChatGPT. That soon we will see very quick development of chatbots, of all the all kind of support systems that are telling us what to do, what to eat, how to behave, what to avoid. So this is something that patients will also explore in the coming years. So I tried to, to review the biggest technologies or the biggest trends that are relevant right now. And within these trends that you see, you can develop your story about the technologies in the time of COVID-19 and after COVID-19 pandemic and the impact of technologies on healthcare. One of the stories that I written recently, for example, was the story about Julia. Julia is disabled patient and she is basically closed at home. But during the COVID pandemic, she discovered robotic pets, companion pets. And I interviewed her and she told me that for her, it was a game changer because she could have a companion all the time. She wasn't only dependent on the people carers, but also she could decide herself when to play, how to interact with the companion pet, with the robotic pet. It's a great story, but the story shows also how to change the perspective when you talk about technology and healthcare. So you can tell the story from the perspective of the patients, what I like most, but also from the perspective of the technology providers or from the institutions like WHO that is also developing solutions, AI-based solutions in healthcare after the COVID pandemic. So there are a lot of trends, a lot of things to talk about, but it should be a short introduction. I will send you this document, this review of the most important trends. And yeah, thank you very much. That's for me as an introduction.
Thank you very much, Artur. We're going to dive into some of these issues in the question, but next I wanted to hand over to Shen, who is going to give a presentation as well. Shen.
Thanks, Fergus, and thanks, Arthur, as well for the comprehensive introduction of the trends. So I think for me, would like to actually take a step back and take a stab at the question on what exactly is digital health, and also how do we prepare for the next health crisis. Fergus, could you move the slide forward? Yeah, so I think sticking very true to the academia roots, we usually like to frame the question a little bit in terms of where we see things. And when we look at digital health, what the academia side will always put forth is that there's actually no definition of digital health. But at the same time, probably everyone wants an association with it, right? So you see a lot of physicians, you see a lot of clinicians saying that they want to do digital health, and what does that actually entails? So the closest I think we can get to a definition of digital health is actually through FDA in the US, and it defines digital health in various categories. And when you look at all these categories, it goes all the way from mHealth all the way to infrastructure in terms of health information technology. Then you look at personalized medicine. So it's a wide-ranging domain that we are talking about. And I think Arthur captures it quite succinctly in terms of the 14 different trends that we can observe down the line. And WHO themselves actually do a ranking system on what the maturity of e-health in the various countries around the world. You can feel free to download that on Google. And I think they assess each countries in terms of various domains. And in these 8 domains, you can also see that the domains that they assess each individual countries on range from very, very fundamental basic foundations all the way to the use of social media, which is interestingly another angle of digital health in today's context. And from the academia side, I think the closest we can get to a consensus or lack of consensus on what digital health is through the programs that individual universities actually offer, right? So if you offer a program, you got to define what exactly you are offering in the program. And I think you can see that in many different countries and different universities, and that includes very, very top tier universities like Oxford, Columbia, Cambridge. They all have varying degrees of definitions of digital health. Some label it very close to biomedical informatics, but in the other spectrum, the curriculum is tiered towards AI, computing, big data, and statistics. And for me, I think regardless of what we want to consider as digital health, it needs to be scoped in the discussion that we have. And I think broadly speaking, digital health can be assumed as the application of technology in all aspects of health. So whether it's delivery of healthcare or whether it's evaluating of healthcare, I think digital technology can be applied to some of these things. Next slide, please. I think one of the things that Fergus and the panelists actually spoke about is how do we then monitor, observe, and also prepare for the next health crisis. And coincidentally, I gave a lecture quite recently on this, and I think this is on the back foot of the pandemic that we just slowly emerging out from. And I think when it comes to how do we define as a crisis, I think we go back to the basics again. And we define it really from the perspective of a time of great danger, difficulty, or doubts, where problems must be solved or important decisions must be made. And I think we extract this from the textbook and we extract this from the dictionary. And I try to see it from multiple angles, whether it's from a patient angle, the clinician angle, academia angle, or from a country perspective. And I think from the patient's perspective, I think the next crisis that they would imagine would actually be how do they navigate care, who to see, what specialty to see, is the care covered, and the cost of care would then, because of digital health, the cost to speak to somebody or a machine be very, very different. And I think from the clinician end, it's about the expectations of care now, with the use of digital technologies, whether it would soon replace the traditional delivery of care in terms of a bedside consultation, and then what are the medical legal implications of digital health. Then we look at from the academia perspective and from a student perspective versus a lecturer perspective. And from a student perspective, if we imagine ourselves in the shoes of a medical student, the next crisis will be what do they actually learn from the biochemistry, physiology, all the way to clinical bedside medicine. Are these then still going to be relevant in the next 1 or 2 years? When medical school was back in 10 years, 20 years ago, I think the curriculum hasn't changed very much. And even as we start to sort of factor in health tech into the curriculum, it still doesn't take up a lot of the curriculum effort that clinicians or lecturers do. So there is that perspective of, from a lecturer's perspective, what do we teach a medical student then down the line? And I think from the country's perspective, which is where I think a lot of the conversations are being framed on what is the next health crisis. We cannot simply look at just communicable disease, because countries at different stages of progress and development will have different considerations. So in a more developed country, certainly I think non-communicable disease still is and will be the predominant crisis that needs to be solved in the next 1 year, 2 years, and even during COVID periods. It did not bring down mortality causes of cancer or mortality percentages of cardiovascular diseases. And I think if you look at global statistics that have been published in the past 2 years, while COVID has seen a spike in the deaths related to communicable disease, non-communicable disease still takes up a huge proportion of these deaths and morbidity in the country. And I think the last part of a crisis is how do you sustain healthcare systems as it is built now, and how it's going to be in the next 1 or 2 years. And I think that would nicely frame up some of the thought process. And certainly you can go into individual perspective and spend hours on end navigating how do you define the crisis and how do you solve those crises. But I think we will leave some time for Q&A. And I think that brings me to the end of my 2 slides. Fergus, back to you.
Thank you very much to both of you. Those were both very interesting presentations. I have a kickoff question for both of you. And actually, Shen, it was something that you had in your slide, which was around for the academics. You said, what do I learn? What do I teach? If we were to think about journalists right now in newsrooms wanting to understand what they need to be looking at, what do they learn? What do they need to teach their colleagues, or what do they need to be taught?
I don't know if the question is...
Well, I'm putting you on the spot. What's the first thing that a newsroom should focus on in terms of learning about the next health crisis, or how to deal with the next health crisis?
I think I draw sort of lessons from the medical world, in the sense that it's not that the environment around us has not progressed, but there's reasons why we stick to the roots of that teachings of fundamentals and foundations. It's because increasingly what we start to realize is that without a strong foundation, it's very difficult for you to be synthesis of information. So you will never be able to keep up with all the information that's out there, but your ability to then synthesize, crystallize, and then explain it to the patient becomes incrementally important with the flood of knowledge out there in the world. So I think for journalism, it's also about the same, where you do need to be well-rounded. You do need to have a strong foundation. And then with the influx of information, your job is then to really synthesize and also curate the information, and also provide your professional opinion from the various angles that you stand. So I think it's not too different. And at least when I approach it from the academia perspective, these are reasons why the medical teachings have largely remained the same, even though the practice of healthcare has progressed quite significantly over the past few years.
Thank you, Artur. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, of course. Well, I would add something to that, because there is not something like the next big healthcare crisis, because we are already in a healthcare crisis. Healthcare have been already in a crisis for a long time. We have, a gap between the demand and the supply of healthcare services, and we have an aging society, a pandemic of non-communicable diseases. We have shortages of healthcare professionals. It is a big crisis. COVID-19 was, of course, the most visible crisis that we've experienced in the last years. But I would, for example, suggest all the journalists that would like to see what's this transformation in healthcare about, to read some books about digital health transformation. One of them is a recently published book by Tom Lowry. He's working for Microsoft, and he's written a great book, Hacking Healthcare, How AI and Intelligence Revolution Will Reboot an AI-linked System. So this is a review of what is coming to us and how to prepare for this big crisis in healthcare that will be only bigger. We won't solve the problems that we are experiencing right now with the old tools. That's why we need new technologies and new tools to approach the new challenges.
You talk about technologies a lot, both of you, but I'd really like to understand what the limitations are, and also with kind of developments in technologies, that those are going to certainly serve some groups of patients and people in society, but there are going to be, as technology expands and gets better and potentially more expensive, there are other people who miss out. So Hongshen, I wonder if I could just kind of ask you what the limitations are in the technology and where that gap starts to emerge, and how we need to look at making sure that gap doesn't get bigger.
So to answer your question, Fergus, actually, I think the gap only widens when we don't localize the technology to the country that we are in. And that's because we fundamentally feel that with technology, there should be scalability. But healthcare is a very, very different creature in itself, where while you have technology, it does not necessarily always equate to scalability. While some features of the technology might be scalable, but not the wholesale solution, which means that a solution that you developed in the United States will then not be 100% applicable to a Southeast Asian country like Singapore, right? And I think that's where the gap will start to widen if the technology is not applied in context. And I feel that a lot of times from the technology world, as we try to implement solutions, we feel that there is strong applicability based on a subset of user journeys. However, when we try to extrapolate it for everybody, it lacks that inclusiveness, and the inclusiveness becomes then fundamentally important for these technologies to actually take flight in each of these countries.
Artur, same question to you around what you see, where you see that gap, or if you see one.
I completely agree with Hong. Of course, we have to mind the inclusiveness in technologies. I mean that, for example, all the smartwatches, all the wearables that are monitoring our health, and maybe soon we will be able to monitor even blood glucose level using any smartwatch. I don't name it. But then, of course, there will be two types of society: those who can afford new technologies and improve their health, and those who can't. And what we already are observing, that basically the new technologies are used by those who can afford them, not by those who really need them, not by those who would need to, I don't know, improve their health with changes in behavior and so on and so on. So the digital gap will be a very important topic in the next years. And also the next question would be, how much technology do we need in our health? Yeah, when do we really need to go to the doctor, and when we just can meet our doctor online, or maybe use a symptom checker, and then giving this place that we are, this maybe place in a waiting room that we are occupying, giving to someone else who is really in need of care, who really needs to see the doctor face to face. So this solidarity team will be something that is very important, and this is the question that we will have to answer in the next years. I don't have the answer yet.
Thank you. There's a question just on this subject around the gap in technology or affordability from the audience, and I would encourage any other questions from the audience, put them in the Q&A. This is specifically about not just individuals and the kind of gap, potential gap in technology and affordability, but on a country-to-country level. So the question is, when assessing new technology, do you pay particular attention to the issue of privacy, affordability, and do you worry about an increasing gap between countries that can afford to adopt new technologies versus those that maybe don't have a sophisticated data culture? And I think for lay people like myself, we saw that during the pandemic, of which we are still in, but the difference in vaccine rollout and numbers being reported around people being around infections. So you've addressed almost the individual question around gap, but what about the global implications and country versus country implications? Hongchen.
So interesting question, and I think whoever that typed that's a loaded question, because there's a lot of parts to it that needs to be dived into. But I think when we look at the gap between countries, I think firstly, I think every country tries to solve different problems, and I think in the pandemic is not really a very good example of that, because when we look at the pandemic, I think it goes beyond just healthcare implications. It goes into social, economical, and political issues. And when Fergus, you mentioned reporting of vaccines and availability of vaccines, I think it goes just beyond the data culture and access of culture. It also goes into a little bit of a political arena over there. So, but I do think that every country is at different stage of growth. In today's world, especially, I think that the accessibility to technology is not so much of an issue of the country. It's more of the adoption of technology, and I think every country will pace its adoption a little bit differently. But I have no doubts that most, if not all, countries will catch up to international standards or whatever standards that we want to set for e-health or digital health. If there is a strong will, both politically and as well as in the country level. So I don't worry as much about the gap that is increasing, but I look at maybe in 10-20 years time, I believe that with the will and with the access that everyone has, everyone should be at the same playing field.
Thank you. There's another question from me, but I'm actually going to take my privilege as moderator and throw this one to Artur instead. In your work in science, in covering science and health, as a journalist, are you seeing the traditional health beat evolving to include tech, or are health and tech being treated as two separate disciplines? Artur.
Well, that's a really good question. I think that digital health won't be a separate discipline. Digital health will be soon a healthcare simply, because it's like with all these technologies that we've seen in the recent 100 years. At the beginning, we have this hype curve, and we all are talking about digital health, about the wearables, about mobile health. About innovations in healthcare, you name it. But soon it will be part of the healthcare, and we won't use all these names to describe what we are talking about. It will be simply a healthcare, and digital health will be a part of the healthcare. It won't be something specific. It won't be something additional to healthcare. It's still healthcare. You know, everything we do, all of the trends that I described, it's about healthcare. It's about patients. It's about treating patients, diagnosing patients, and that's it. So we are still in the phase that we are talking about digital health, and we are thinking about this. What is basically digital health? What is digital health transformation? For example, I call it rather digital health transformation or transformation in healthcare, which is technological but also societal transformation, not only technological. This is something, and this is another perspective, because we don't talk only about technologies in this transformation, but also about society, how society is changing, and how society is using and approaching technologies. So soon, I guess that in 10 years, maybe we will be only talking about healthcare, not digital health, and there will be no division between modern healthcare, new healthcare, future healthcare, and this traditional healthcare. It simply will be healthcare.
Just one follow-up question on technology for now, and this comes from one of the participants, who makes the point that new technologies are costly, and won't the introduction of new technologies therefore increase the cost of healthcare for individuals? I wonder if Hongshen, you could answer that.
I agree to a certain degree that newer technologies are definitely going to be a lot more costly. That's where scalability becomes very important if you want to achieve accessibility down the line. However, I think that the driving and the increase of healthcare costs, it's based upon multi-factors, and it's not just because you introduce a new technology, therefore healthcare costs were going to skyrocket, right? So I think when we consider new technologies, I think it's important to understand what the impact the technology is going to drive, both in health outcomes as well as in financial savings for the patient, then for the nation, and then for the payer. So I think when you think about that from this perspective, you would realize that a lot of the sort of cutting edge, a lot of the very, very interesting and sexy new technologies like implementing AI and all that may drive very, very low return on investment. Therefore, you need to strongly consider whether that should be part of the offerings for the patient. And if there is a strong justification for the offering and that the financial modeling has been done, then I don't necessarily think that all new technology drives increase in cost permanently, at least from my perspective.
Thank you. This one is for both of you, because I think in both of your fields and lines of work, it may come up, and it's a question from a participant, which is how you navigate conflicts of interest that arise. So Artur, as a health journalist, both as a health journalist, but someone who may work with or kind of report on the health tech companies, and Hongshen as a practitioner, and how do you create that balance between, you know, advocating for new technologies that maybe be presented by some companies versus the needs of the patient? I guess it's a fundamental question around conflict of interest in any field, but how do you personally navigate that, or is it even an issue? But I'll go to Artur first, and then Hongshen.
Well, of course, as a journalist, you have to follow some rules, and you have to have something like an ethical compass. I do a lot of interviews with companies, with tech companies around the world, but I try to separate what I'm thinking about the technologies and what the company are thinking about technologies. So sometimes I have to use a disclaimer, like for example, in the case of the last article about Julia and her robots, because I named a lot of robots, like for example, Sony Eyeball and so on. So at the end of the text, I wrote a disclaimer that nobody, neither me or Julia, benefited from the companies that were named in the article. Recently, I did an interview with Tom Lorbe from Microsoft, and of course, I try and I am so objective as I only can. I don't, ask only nice questions, because as a journalist, I have to follow some rules. But I can't, of course, I'm an enthusiast of new technologies, and I have this tendency sometimes to be very enthusiastic and to ask very positive questions. But every time I prepare my interview, I try to separate negative questions or asking difficult questions and positive questions, like what are we expecting in 5 years? What are the new trends? But of course, what about privacy, data security? What about cost? What about benefits from the patients? What about digital gap? So I try to, every time I prepare an interview, I try to make this rule 50-50. Difficult questions, but also the positive questions. It's about interior ethical compass that every journalist should have.
Okay.
I think it's not very different from what Artur mentioned in terms of having a compass. And I think for me, it's always going back to the root word of health tech, right? So you are first health, then you are tech. So it's important that you center all, if not all your solutions around the patient. So we always ask ourselves whether it's from the clinician end or from the technology end, what good and what are you trying to impact on the patient? And I think when you have those questions answered, then there will be scalability and there will also be adoption on the technology front. So at least from where I stand, there isn't any conflict because the intent is always to benefit the patient first, then the rest coming next.
Thank you. There's a question from the audience about disinformation, which I'm actually not going to put to you in this session because, but I am going to use this opportunity to say that the previous virtual session we did in this series was focused entirely on disinformation in health and science. So hopefully Jen from WAN-IFRA will pop the YouTube link to that session in the chat, and you can have a look at 4 people discussing that for an hour. But the next question I wanted to put to you is around research, and this is drawing a little bit on one of the questions from the audience as well. What should governments focus on to improve the development of health research and technology, and actually the application of those findings in actual patient care? And I also wanted to kind of frame that from a journalism side, which is how do we turn research into action or research into solutions journalism, which is increasingly the way that a lot of newsrooms are working. That's a very big question. I'll come to Shen around the what should governments be focusing on in research, and then Artur in a moment around how we put research through a solutions lens for audiences. Shen.
Thanks, Fergus. I think I believe that in fact, in order for you to enforce a certain level of standard, there needs to be policies and regulations around implementation of healthcare technology, and it has to be backed by research. And I think it also goes back to some of the guiding principles that I always have from a healthcare information perspective. The solutions that you put out should always be backed by research. If not, you should do research to prove them. I think that is the clearest and the most objective way for you to do no harm, especially to your patients. And I think certainly I think research also needs a huge dose of localization. So a research in the United States should not be extrapolated to the Southeast Asia country, neither should it be vice versa. And I think that you can base your solutions based on these frameworks that have been proven effective. But if you are in a completely new field, then you need to enforce a certain set of standards and disciplines and also regulations to make sure that healthcare technology solutions first do no harm and are backed by strong foundations of research.
Thank you. Also, how do we take research, as journalists, how do we take research that is out there, which can often be quite chunky, and for some journalists can be quite overwhelming, especially with the size of data sets, and how do we think about solutions when we're reporting?
I would advise that you shouldn't be afraid about experimenting with new topics, because we are in the phase that we don't know which technologies will work, which not. I have to admit that I wrote a few stories about technologies that don't exist anymore, for example, for 5 years or 10 years. And I don't blame myself that I didn't do a research or something like this, because you simply don't know. Even if there is a very strong foundation of a research, you never know if the technology will disappear in 10 years, in 5 years or not. So sometimes it's about experimenting. Of course, it's not about writing about only fascinating technologies and about gadgets. You should really try to avoid writing about gadgets, about shiny tools, about shiny technologies. First, do your research. First, ask also patients or maybe patients' organization what they are thinking about the technology. Do they really need this app or this wearable? Is it something that is backed by research? Are there some scientific papers published on this topic? And so on and so forth. How much does it cost also? Yeah. Going back also to the question about the government, from my perspective, government should now focus only on developing a right legislation basis, but also on developing infrastructure, technical infrastructure. So everybody has access to data, everybody has access to the basic technologies, every health facility has the access to basic technologies. So we work step by step on avoiding this digital gap that is rising right now. Yeah.
Thank you. Just as we kind of move into our last kind of period of time together, there's a really good question, and which is very succinct, and I wish I'd have just thought about asking it in this way. But do you each have one story in this field that you wish journalists were covering, or is there something which is there a story, subject, or area where journalists are missing at? They've not noticed it, but they really should be paying attention. So. Artur first, is there a story that you think journalists should be covering that they're not?
Well, there are a ton of stories that should be covered. For me, the most interesting stories are when you make a kind of confrontation between the skeptics and those who are very enthusiastic about technologies. Because from this point on, you can see what's the problem, why there is this gap between points of view when we see technologies. There are still a lot of people who are afraid of technologies because, dehumanization of healthcare, because of, I don't know, we won't be able to see doctor one-to-one anymore. So sometimes I try to do these interviews between two sides of the stories, but also to combine different perspectives, like including patients. This is something, where you're looking for your next big story. Start with patients. What technologies do they use? How these technologies are helping them in their daily life? it doesn't have to be, you know, a story about next big thing. It can be a story about wearable that is measuring how many steps a patient is doing every day and how it helped him or her to improve daily habits or improve health. This is something very important to start from the scratch, from the basic, and to show the power of technologies in daily life. And even this is very small, tiny thing, but still it's a very important part of the healthcare and this transformation.
Shen, is there a story or subject that journalists should be covering that they're not?
So I do have a little bit of a selfish agenda, because I've always in my lecture alluded on the healthcare journey to industrial revolution. And I think when we look at healthcare, I think it is starting to look a lot like that. So industrial revolution in the past, you know, you make, say for example, a shoe. Every shoe is handmade, and then with machines, technology, and all that, you can now mass make shoes, such that now the cost of making a handmade shoe, it's multiples and multiples upon multiples of getting there. So with healthcare, and if we extrapolate the same situation to healthcare, maybe in 10 years time, in order for a physician to lay his hands on you just to examine your abdomen or listen to your chest, perhaps that will cost infinitely a lot more than just speaking to a machine or a robot. So I think that will be an interesting angle to take on and learn from lessons of you know, the past, and see whether healthcare really needs to go through the same lessons.
Thank you. I want to ask you a question which may not seem like an obvious direction to go in, but actually I think it's important, and a question that we're trying to bring into as many topics around journalism as possible, which is actually the role of climate change on health and society. And I want to ask you, do we need to think about the ongoing impact of climate change as a looming or as a current health crisis and disaster? Do we need to start treating it like a major health incident? I wonder if either of you can speak to the role of climate change and the impact that has on health as something that you are looking at, as something that we need to be thinking about as journalists, as potentially patients, or as practitioners in science and health. Shen.
So really interesting, and I think it brings together two very pressing problems in the world today. But I would say that health has always taken the environment into consideration. Whenever we see a patient, we always ask about, you know, social history. We always ask about occupational history, because that frames the understanding of the person. And certainly as we practice in this part of the world, things that we worry about are periods of haze, where there are forest fires, there are man-made, and the pollution of the climate tends to come across, or our patients with allergies, as simple as our patients with allergies. So with climate change, with temperature changes, your pollen season are not going to be as regular as the past. So patients with hay fever and all that, you start to have difficulties in diagnosis. And then the difficulty in diagnosis will then lead to many different permutations of treatment. And in the end, I think some of the more relevant problems might not surface fast enough, or you make certain assumptions based on previously known periods and seasons. And I think you can't not talk about health without talking about the impact that the climate has on the individual, or even on the country.
Thank you, Artur. I wonder, as a science and health journalist, how you are thinking about the link between climate change and health.
And this is maybe the next big story for the journalist that should be described, about the link between the climate change and between transformation in healthcare, because we know that healthcare is accounting for nearly 5% of the global CO2 net emissions. And we also know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, the CO2 emissions per consultation, doctor consultation, significantly decreased due to the rise of teleconsultations. So this is a great story, you know, to link how technologies can help to create a greener healthcare, healthier healthcare. And I also covered this topic, and there are a lot of connections because we are traveling to the doctors using our cars. We don't have to even to get a prescribed pills or medicines. And we are taking our cars. We are waiting in the waiting room. We don't have to. If we just use our computers, we can also contribute to decreasing the CO2 emissions. So that's the link between climate crisis and transformation in healthcare that we need, because the healthcare that we have right now doesn't work or is simply sick a little bit.
So we're just before we close, I've got one last question for you both, which is, you both represent different sides of the way we talk about health science and healthcare, one from the journalistic side, one from the practitioner side. How should journalists, scientists, medical practitioners be working together around health and science information and communicating advances in technologies and in developments in science? What is the one thing that we could do to foster better collaboration between the two sides? Artur.
Well, sometimes it's about following your heart, because when I see technology that could be very beneficial for patients, and I see that the startup is strongly cooperating with scientists, and they're really doing a great job, I try to support them. I try to create a story around it. I try to make it more public because I'm convinced that it's something that can be beneficial for the patients. So this is also about supporting some solutions, some technologies, and to show the public what's the impact, what's the benefits. And cooperation is quite easy. I think it's about offering a cooperation, you know, to giving a hand as a first side, and to telling, well, you have a great story, you have a great solution, or maybe let's do something, article, affiliate on an interview together with the scientists that you are cooperating with, or with an institution, scientific institution. So yeah, don't be afraid to experiment, because it's about experimenting still. Don't be afraid to make mistakes when writing about new technologies, because mistakes are simply a risk that you have to be aware, and there's nothing wrong.
Thank you. Hong Chen, the last very quick word goes to you.
Yeah, I think I've once been told that there are three sides to a story: mine, yours, and the truth. So I think it's extremely important that with something that's very factual in science, you need to caveat it regardless of which opinion you come from, so that the reader understands the position that you are taking. And there's no right or wrong positions to take. I think as long as those assumptions are made clear to the reader, then I think it's everybody's game to make it. And I think in terms of collaboration and cooperation, I think it always goes back to how you ask the questions. Physicians are typically more irate than usual when journalists come forth and ask questions, because that always carries a negative connotation. But I think if the questions are thoughtful, if the questions are well asked, I think the communities can always come together to ponder, debate, or even come to a consensus on some of the bigger topics out there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're out of time. Thank you very much to both of you for the wonderful discussion, and we've explored some really interesting areas. To those of you who've been watching, if you've enjoyed this session, please do go back and look at that previous one on health coverage and disinformation. The YouTube link is in the chat. And remember that you can download a new resource from WAN-IFRA and Temasek, which is the Journalism in the Age of Pandemics 2.0 newsroom guide. Finally, I just want to say that this session today has been made possible with the support from Temasek Foundation. They support a diverse range of programs that uplift lives and communities in Singapore and beyond. Its programs strengthen social resilience, foster international exchange and regional capabilities, advance science and protect the planet. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much to the participants, and have a great day.